And we've taken the roll, so we have everyone's attendance recorded. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from the last Finance Committee meeting on February 24th, 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any updates, changes to the minutes? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next, if we have any, I don't think we have anybody here to speak on a non-agenda item. I do not see any visitors. So we'll go on to our order of business. The first one being the review of the pay plan. And do you have a summary of the pay plan changes that you'd like to review?
They were in the memorandum.
Right.
And be happy to answer any questions, but they're in there for the same reasons, and I apologize. Kathy, do you have the memo in front of you? My memo was not included. Do you have it? Great, thank you. All right, so they were dealing with, as in past practice, we've dealt with competitive pay, pay compression, internal equity. This year was a little different in that there were multiple ones versus just a handful. But again, most of this is market-driven, and happy to answer any questions about it. Well, and again, there's no guarantee. So I guess I'd say there's nobody at the low end, and there's a couple people close to the high end. So that gives them some ability for some movement, but there's nobody who's going to get an automatic solely based on market changes at the low end. So.
Well, it looks like we've got pretty low turnover rate, so that kind of keeps, pay compression is something that could happen. But we've not had a lot of turnover, is that correct?
That's correct, thankfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've been successful when there are openings at attracting and retaining, good employees. So that speaks to our policies being good policies. And the updates are just kind of tweaks to reflect the market.
Yep.
Any comments from anybody else?
Just had a quick question, and I think I know the answer, but I assume that our benefits beyond pay are comparable to our competitors as far as health insurance, time off, that kind of thing.
I would say the answer is yes, and I would say that's further been underscored by our recent joining of the North Shore Employee Benefits Consortia, and so we're in there with Wilmette, Mundelein, Lincolnshire, other municipalities, and that we would, part of our market. So I would say yes to that. Interesting that you say that. I had a conversation with Regis about that earlier today, about the idea that there's another document that the board considers and approves that has that compensation package as part of our employee personnel manual, which you guys will see at the second meeting in April. But that information is there. We don't have that as like our pay plan is not complete compensation, right? And that was Regis's point. And certainly we do when we look at it, yes, we consider those things and those other benefits, yes.
Thank you.
I have a question about this document as well, that is, so I recognize the village having a high functioning team, and so you have people with high performance staff, I would say. So as part of this document and as part of a pay performance package, what is the incentive? What is the extra incentive for this team to stay together? And that might be vacation, bonus plans, and health insurance, personal sick days, but all these things are basically making the case for a team to stay together. Because here what I see is a consistent framework for pay package for the staff. But above and beyond that package, what is your incentive to provide to other people to stay together?
Yeah, I certainly, I'm obliged to operate within the regulations I'm given, right? But I would say that when there's been times, if there's something that's been extraordinary, that I've brought it to the board and we've worked through it. I would say there's an example where we're going to be able to keep Mike Hosking here as our chief of police. Mm-hmm. And he's asked for a couple little things that are well within my spending authority that I'm going to say yes to. And I mean, little things, very little things that are niceties that I would easily say yes to because it matters. And those, go ahead.
The point I want to make is that this framework is great for consistency, but it's not a limiting factor to you, and that you have a flexibility to say yes when it's actually going to be very convenient to continue building the team you have today?
I would say there's been a lot of support on this board historically to, if there's something that I felt was important and I would come to you all and ask for that, that would maybe outside of this board has been there.
Okay, good.
And if it's been something that's been short in timing, I've come to Kathy about it and we've talked about it.
Well, I'd like to, give one thing, frankly, as long as I've been village president, I had noticed when I became village president that, the employee staff here worked all day on the day before Thanksgiving, and they worked all day on Christmas Eve. I suggested, and so by presidential decree, but I am going to be asking the board before I leave to make this an official policy if possible. And again, to speak to you, it's a small thing, but I tell them that they may go at noon on the day before Thanksgiving, and Christmas Eve is a holiday. I mean, and to me, that these are small things, but if you're talking team, and Drew has been extremely obliging to that when I have just said, go home, everybody. But I think that those are the kinds of things that keep people together as a team. And they are relatively maybe minor things, but that's what makes teams work.
In my experience, the minor things are actually what keeps and makes a team together.
Absolutely.
What makes a
And I would say,
difference?
for some of that stuff is giving people opportunities they may not get in another organization that may be bigger, and some of it may be training that they can get, get advanced through that they may not, or they have to wait in line to get in another larger organization and those things. And that's certainly true in all departments here, and some more so than others. There's so much, in an organization our size, there's limited opportunities. It's just the nature of the beast. So we try to find creative ways to make it more enticing.
And my point is, for you to have, even though you have a framework, to have the flexibility to be accommodating and enticing as an organization to keep the great people.
We'll make sure that's reflected in the notes when I have to come and ask for forgiveness for something I've done, so.
Any other comments about the pay plan?
Nope.
So do we have then a motion to accept the recommended revisions to the plan?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Thank you.
Next, there are some general fund updates. Bettina, are you going to share what those are?
I will.
Thank you.
So as I've worked through the final changes and updates to the general fund that happen as we get closer to the budget deadline and actually presenting it at the hearing, we've come across a few small changes that weren't outlined in a memo because they're really not that big dollar-wise, but I thought I'd speak to them. So one of the things, server licenses was originally in the general fund under the police department. That was $5,550. Because those licenses are spread across the entity as a whole and we all use those licenses as part of our function in IT, we moved those to the replacement fund. So there was a reduction for the $5,550. And then in the same breath, Lake County Task Force is dues and memberships that the police department pays for. And those dues also include a liability insurance that has increased for this year, and so there was an increase for $1,000, bringing those dues to $1,500 for both years in the biennial budget. We reviewed the HVAC system project that was slated for this room. Originally, we were just looking at air conditioning, and Mike Croak, the facilities manager, came back and said for different HVAC reasons it would be better to focus on the air conditioning and the heating at one time. So in doing so, it's more cost effective, but it did increase the project cost by $10,000. So that was incorporated into the general fund, actually $10,750. Public Works made an additional request for repair to the spill bucket. We received a quote and we're looking at that in the second year of the biannual budget. So that increased by $7,500. And as Drew mentioned, there were some changes to salaries based on the chief's continuation with us. And that's really about it.
I would say there's something else I'd like to mention, that some of the things that are part of the updates, I just wanted to share with you all, that some of the stuff that fell to the cutting room floor, right, something that's not in here, I mentioned this to Chair Ankerman,
Right.
but the idea that this year's budget, again, after being talked about at length internally, did not include electric charging stations for vehicles. We had talked about doing that maybe in the central business district, and we had them priced out last year. I think it was $23,000 for two, thereabouts. And so, but we didn't put it in here. We investigated a little more, looked at what other communities doing. Are they giving away the energy? Are they not? Are they charging? And anyway, we talked about it, but in the end, we didn't put it in here. But if you wanted to add in there, if you thought that was important, I just didn't want it to fall to the floor and say, hey, we didn't include this, and
Well, I know that Lake Forest has them at the train station. Isn't that it? Isn't that
they
the
claim they have at
extent?
City Hall too, I thought, but I have never
Oh.
seen them at City Hall, but
Oh, you mean City Hall, not the new
I think,
campus?
is it the new campus they have them too?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I've seen them there in the parking lot.
Have you ever seen them being utilized?
I think they get some revenue stream out of the ones close to the train station or at the train station, and I don't know, Glenn, if there's more on that.
I wondered about how that whole compensation for how much energy is used takes place. I don't know how that works.
I'm sorry, I missed that last question.
I just don't know how it works if somebody uses one of those electric
Are they paying for it
car.
or not?
Right, how do you do, you just swipe your card and then it registers how much?
Yeah, I think typically you would make an account through a provider. Typically, ChargePoint is the network around here. Each different providers in different regions, but usually have a pre-set-up account. I think you could swipe a card to on the spot if you wanted.
But isn't it generally a pass-through? It's not a money-making enterprise for, you know, the city of Lake Forest or whoever's providing it, correct?
So what we looked at a few different communities. So here in this region, actually the communities that are doing it are they're able to put their chargers in the same location as their franchise consideration accounts. So Commonwealth Edison, as part of their franchise, gives certain village facilities free power, including this one. And by free, I mean that power is, the cost for that power bundled up, they're charged out to ComEd customers as a franchise fee. So for our other comparable municipalities we looked at, Libertyville, we looked at Lake Forest, I believe one more, they managed to put that charger on their franchise account. It was in the right location to do so. We don't think that would be possible here unless you were to convert spaces right outside Village Hall to that purpose. Now, I can tell you from our friends in Lake Forest, so we know the capital cost of these chargers, about $20,000. A 3-year maintenance agreement, a little under $1,200 per year. And then 2019, they accumulated $1,400 in revenue total on the year. The year before that, $800. So it's a pretty low grossing
Yeah.
product.
And given the registered vehicles in the city or the village of Lake Forest, I mean, I don't know if we would actually expect our own residents to be using that, or people outside the village primarily to be the ones who would be using it in theory if we had it. I mean, in Lake Forest, is it people who are visiting Lake Forest who are non-residents? I mean, do we even know?
We don't have a good sense of that,
Right,
unfortunately.
And so I guess my point is, I don't think we have a large number of electric vehicles here, but it would probably be visitors to the village who would be using it.
I see several Teslas parked right along Block 1 almost every day. And
This still seems to be a pretty low return investment, and, you know, I'd be inclined to do it if whoever the provider is says that they'll provide the capital stuff for free, you know, the equipment and so on, but beyond that, I'm not too interested.
I have an electric car, and for me, it's a waste of time to go to ChargePoint. It's very expensive, about $5 or $6, and I get about 10 to 20 miles on that. And the power that is put through that charger is worthless to me. I would have to leave my car about 30 hours for a full charge, when I have about 20 minutes to do it. And if I go to a Tesla charging station, it takes me 25 minutes for a full charge. Here, it's going to take me 10 to 40 hours. So
Interesting.
if I see one, I just pass it and I'm done.
And certainly there are some municipalities that have installed a mix of Tesla chargers in the regular, I forget the name, Class 5 chargers, whatever. Elgin, I believe, was going down that road. The problem there is either you're in the unfortunate position of either having to give a lot of real estate to chargers to justify having a few just for Tesla, or you're preferring one manufacturer over others.
Right.
So rock and a hard place.
So it sounds like we may not have sufficient critical mass here to provide the right equipment in the right place and
I was,
Do it well.
I was gonna bring this up, in the section on comprehensive fee schedule, but I'm wondering if instead of spending all that money on a capital project, $20,000, if maybe we could allocate some, well, it wouldn't even be an allocation, but do a discount or even free permit fee for
Oh, vehicle
people
permit?
to install their electric chargers at home.
Okay, that's a nice idea.
One, it would encourage people to get the permit, so it could be inspected, but also it might encourage people to get an electric vehicle.
So the building permit fee, the 3% of whatever it costs?
Yeah, which really
to-
wouldn't be much in the scheme of things for us or for the homeowner to have a electric charging station installed in their home, but I do know of at least one person who has done it without a permit and did it himself and didn't get it inspected. So, I think that would encourage, at the very least, to have it done right and inspected, so.
And it would give us a better idea of how many people have electric vehicles in their
Right.
It would,
community.
Get the
yeah.
data.
Well, it gives an incentive without a cost to the
Right.
village, which I think is really kind of the way we're looking at going.
And we could even go along the same lines for solar installations, which is a little bit more intensive as far as inspections go, but, I think that might be the better plan than trying to do a capital project of a public charging station.
Yeah, our timing is not great. If we were about a month from now, we may have a better idea with vehicle stickers about exactly how many electric
Right.
vehicles we.
I was just going to
In
say.
fact, I was
yeah.
going to say, that could be a very low-cost entry point to this, is to offer free vehicle sticker for someone who had an electric vehicle.
Because Regis, isn't the state license more expensive for an electric vehicle?
Last year was $10, $11, I don't remember, and it's now about $250 starting January 1st.
And the rationale for that in Springfield this year
Or no?
was, since you're not paying for gas, and the gas is the motor fuel tax, that pays for the roads and everything else, and they're using
Their
the
share,
roads.
yeah.
They need to pay a fair share. That was the concept of putting that in.
So Regis, it went up to 250, not to 1,000? I had heard rumors it was 1,000,
I
right?
think that was
But it went to
bandied about
250.
at first in Springfield.
Yeah, which I find very offensive. Look, I'm really in favor of a free vehicle sticker for the electrics, and the idea Aaron had about the no permit fee. It's a great idea, better than spending $20,000 on something nobody will use.
I think it directly incentivizes the people who are going to do it. It doesn't penalize those who don't do it as much,
I
if
think
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the only positive with installing a public charging station is it might get a couple more people to come into town. I mean, they're gonna come into town anyway, right?
Right.
But if they know that they can stay and charge their car while they go get a meal or something like that, then, that might bring them in as opposed to going somewhere else.
But we have,
But other than that, I don't see,
but to Regis's point, we can only park for how much time downtown?
2
I believe
hours.
it's 2 hours.
2 hours. And the benefit of 2-hour charge is,
about
15 miles.
15 miles. Yeah.
On charge point.
Yeah.
But there's another thing. There's charge point, there's a couple more. I have cars for these couple more. And there's Tesla, okay? So if there's Tesla, I will stop by the Tesla because I can charge my car on a slow charger in about 4 hours. On a high power charger like in Prairie View or in Highland Park, I can do that in 20 minutes. Charge points is notorious for low power. Are there other providers that would be willing to come to the village and put their chargers for much less than $20,000, or even Tesla, but that's limiting, I get that. But there are other people on the market doing the same business.
Well, and the question would also be, would we want to put it in some of the prime parking spaces near all of the shops and, facilities? Or would we want to put it somewhere that's a little bit further removed, with parking being such a premium?
And
So,
I would imagine too that as time goes on with technology, it'll become less expensive for that technology. So if we wait a couple of years, the cost of actually putting these in will be a lot less because the actual technology and the item will be less expensive. Just sort of the way it goes with technology.
I think there's a premium to that. We're paying for the premium. would you be able to negotiate, saying that we got ChargePoint at $20,000, another person can do a lot better?
Potentially. So the selection of ChargePoint, two statements. One, we didn't go out and solicit, competitive proposals for this, but a few years back, and this is before my time, I hope Drew can correct me if I'm mistaken, I believe members of the North Shore Electricity Aggregation Consortium went out and sought proposals, and ChargePoint through this particular vendor, Carbon Day, at that time was the lowest. Their pricing is similar. So it's not the most current, but it was originally a competitive process.
I mean, at the time, even when that happened, there was a subsidy going on that was, I think, supporting like half of the cost to do it, but at the time, it was, I think we probably had like 2 vehicles in town. It was very early in the electric vehicle world. It was like, we were looking at putting it in the Walnut lot, and people were like, why would we do that? So ultimately, it was decided not to do it then.
Right.
I think at this point, it's probably too early. I mean, maybe when we have 10% electric cars,
To revisit something like
revisit,
that, but at this
but
point.
that's a pretty-
maybe
and we have to
incentive
designate one of our spots as electric vehicles only.
Right.
So, I think.
Or more, one or more,
Yeah,
right?
or one or more, or
Yeah.
whatever we decide. yeah.
And the
So-
advice from the person that I think originally was put it where people are, so
Yeah.
put it where they'll see it and use it, and otherwise it won't get used.
Right. So we've heard some consideration of the idea of capital being added, which of course we didn't do. The staff did not recommend it. But in terms of just the conversations of perhaps incentivizing it through either eliminating the fee to have your improvement done to install the mechanism for that, and also to minimize or eliminate the vehicle registration fee, that's something to consider? Is that what I'm hearing from the group?
I would be in favor of both of those.
Likewise in favor of both, please.
Can you get Mike really quick, Mike Croak? The one thing I'm thinking about, if somebody's doing it, maybe they have a detached garage, and maybe they even have to get an increase, go to 220 or something. I'm gonna ask Mike how many permits he's, I know personally some people have done it, talked about doing it, and hopefully it's not the same person who didn't get a permit, but the idea
I don't
of,
know, I mean,
yeah. But
Didn't see a permit hanging in when he was doing it, so.
when I asked Bettina,
He
when
didn't
I went out
specifically state he didn't.
to the seat, she said, practically speaking, it's not too late. We were like right on the verge before throwing out the vehicle sticker communications to residents. We could still, she thinks we should send an email.
So in thinking about what you're doing, I mean, we could certainly add that category to a make or model so people can identify their vehicle, but I don't know what would prompt someone who already has their information in our system to make that change.
Okay.
For the
New cars,
newsletter.
for sure, they're gonna go
Yeah.
add one in and say, oh, electric make model. But we'd have to figure out a way to prompt them to make the change, unless the sticker was free, then.
That would be self-prompting.
Right.
Yeah. So, Mike, I was hoping to ask you a question. The Finance Committee was talking about various incentives regarding electric vehicles, and one of the things, ideas that came up was the village waiving permit fees for persons installing electrical infrastructure at their residences to support charging at home.
Okay.
And I didn't know the volume of permits you may be familiar with, where somebody has done that, and did that require somebody adding, going up to 220 service, or doing, how much, generally, what's the scale and scope of those permits that you've seen?
I haven't seen anyone change their electrical service because of that, so it's really been a low-priced permit for just adding the outlet for cars. I know the Tesla outlets have something you can change inside to either 30 amps, 40 amps, or 50 amps based on how much power you have available. And obviously it takes longer to charge at the lower amperage, but I've seen people who didn't, who couldn't accommodate the 50 amp outlet to just have their electrician make the internal change and do it as a 30 amp outlet, and it just takes them longer to charge, so they've avoided needing to upgrade their service that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
How involved is the inspection of charging station?
It's not that involved. It's usually often just one trip, sometimes two, and relatively short, 15, 20 minutes there. So if they're not changing their service, it's not that much time.
Is it just a new dedicated line to the
Yeah.
box? Is it really?
Right, yeah, one circuit from the box to there. Yeah.
I'd be willing to support right now, given the timeliness of this, the sticker, and then put together kind of an impact statement on what it might be to address what the lost revenue might be if we did the other. But it would be,
Is it
it would
$50? Is it
it
falling
seems
in
to
that
me be
range?
very low impact to do the sticker.
Right. Yeah, for permits, it's probably $50 or $75 permits based on the construction cost, and I think we're only doing, 2 or 3 a year right now.
Really
so not
similar
much
to
money.
the vehicle sticker, not too
Right.
far off.
Yeah, right now, but if,
It would also, by doing the sticker, you'd also maybe flesh out everybody who's got an electric vehicle.
Yeah,
right.
And then you would,
so quiet, you don't know when they're there.
and then you would have a better handle maybe on what the opportunity would be to service this and encourage this, because if we're only doing 3 or 4, I would guess there's more than 3 or 4 electric vehicles in Lake Bluff.
Oh, I think more than just the cost of it, minimal on both sides. I mean, it's not going to make somebody's decision whether they're going to get an electric vehicle if they're going to save $75 on a permit fee. But, we do have a sustainability committee right now that, and if we do, and part of the comprehensive plan is to promote that. So, any small step, I think, along the way can go towards that, towards our goals of becoming more sustainable.
Yeah, and I'll add to that any relief to electric car owners from the additional costs that the state of Illinois imposed on them for registration is certainly a favorable thing from my point of view.
How do they know they are supposed to get a permit? Who tells them?
What, to get to do construction work?
Well, no, to install the unit in their house or their garage.
So that usually involves they're touching the wires in the house
No,
and
but
moving out.
not why. How do they know they need to seek that out before they do that?
Chances are they're speaking with a contractor who would know that, and that I need to get a permit for that.
Gotcha.
And I think the village's code is, I think technically still anything that's $300 worth of materials or costs is requiring a building permit.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like a plumber, you can't get an electrician to show up at your house for less than $300, so.
This is a question from somebody who doesn't have an electric car, obviously. Is it possible that if I have an electric car, I don't have to modify whatever is in my garage? I can just plug it into the wall, or is that not possible?
I don't
Yes.
think so. You probably have a 15 or 20 amp outlet in the wall of your garage. I'm not aware of a car that plugs into that. I think they all do use the larger outlet with a dedicated plug type
Can,
that goes
it
in.
just takes a really,
4 days.
really long time to charge.
So,
We're getting into a thin area here.
I can plug my car in, so 15 amps, 120, and that's going
Uh-huh.
to take about 38 hours.
38 hours.
But I
yeah.
can do it. I can stop
Okay.
on the side of a road, and 40 hours later, I can be gone on any plug. But,
Make sure it's a
convenient.
scenic stop.
so I have to probably become clean on that. The circuit was installed in my house when I moved in, so I had inspection. I don't think I had inspection to specifically address the 80 amp, 250 volts coming to the charger. So it might, to the point of a board, it might be a good idea to also publicize the fact that you probably need a specific inspection for that. And I moved in about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Well, it's been an interesting conversation.
Electrifying, in fact.
Enlightening.
Enlightening, right.
Really charged up.
So I heard vehicle stickers, yes,
Yes.
Yes.
for sure. And then, do you want to see more on building permits, or yes to building permits as well?
I kind of felt like it was something that maybe it would be asking too much at this point to turn on the dime and say, add that too, but you can better speak to that.
That's easy. I mean, that's, from
Okay.
us,
There's
Sounds
no real-
minimal.
There's
Yeah.
no real deadline to that, right? I mean, I guess it's part of the comprehensive fee schedule, maybe.
which is
I don't
coming in
even
the
know.
first
Right.
meeting in April. I
Right,
mean,
which-
So,
so-
but there's not much more information what Mike said. There's a handful a year.
Right,
It's in the $50 to $75 range. It's a low volume, low cost.
right. So it seems like in one sense, you could say, why bother? But in another sense, it's a step in the right direction to fulfill some of those things. So it would seem to me.
Incent behaviors. It's not
Exactly.
gonna-
It seemed to
yeah.
me like that might be the feeling of the board to go ahead and move on both
So
of
you
those.
guys can recommend that to the board as part of the budget package, as part of the revenue streams, and we can and we'll prepare that ordinance to reflect that. Unless, Mike, there's any other guidance you would give on why we wouldn't do that for
No.
any safety reasons or otherwise.
No, I don't have anything else.
Any other comments?
So,
Nope.
from a mechanical standpoint, and this would be a question, I guess, for Bettina, with the fee schedule coming up in April for action, do we have enough time to kind of retool, whether it's a form or putting a stuffer in the envelope, saying, hey, heads up, new benefit for here in Lake Bluff, if you've got, let us know if your vehicle is electric? And is it 100% electric? Which,
For hybrids or, yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's
That needs to be
another
defined.
question, because I'm not an expert on this, but you've got traditional hybrids, you've got plug-in hybrids, you've got 100% electric, and which ones are we incentivizing here? Or all of the above, or?
My opinion is there are so many mild hybrids out now that it would get really tricky saying hybrid. I think you could make the argument for a plug-in hybrid, and of course electric, but plug-in hybrids still pay a normal state licensure fee,
Okay.
Yeah.
state registration fee. It's just the all-electric vehicles that are,
But,
affected
and
that
I'll
way.
just as a devil's advocate,
I agree.
if I've got a plug-in hybrid, I'm still gonna have to go to get my building permit, so.
Sure. I'd be fine with giving the plug-in hybrids. I mean, we're gonna see a lot more of those in the next couple of years.
So is it
So
correct
that will be more impactful on our end.
I mean, somebody's gonna have to sit down and come up with a list,
I agree.
so that whoever is opening up these
Yeah.
letters can go down and,
Yeah. There's
So
a-
is it battery electric vehicles? So that's the Tesla Model 3, the BMW i3, the Chevy Volt, the Chevy Spark, the Nissan Leaf, Ford Focus Electric, Hyundai Ioniq, the Karma Rivera, the Kia Soul, the Mitsubishi i-MI EV, Tesla Model S, Tesla X, Toyota RAV4, and Volkswagen e-Golf. Those are the classification of battery electric vehicles versus,
That list is missing a couple, but,
yeah, this is
yeah.
versus the other, there's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which is like a Chevy Volt. There's different model types apparently, but
You know, a bright line could be that vehicle which lacks an internal combustion engine.
But the i3 BMW has an engine in it to recharge the battery.
The what?
The BMW i3 is an electric vehicle, just
Yeah.
so Drew named it, but it still has a combustion engine in it to recharge the battery while you drive.
that's like a plug-in hybrid.
All right, so that's a plug-in hybrid.
Yeah.
All right, nothing's ever simple,
no good deed goes unpunished.
indeed.
I just had a thought too, like if we decide and we say, okay, the stickers there's gonna be no cost for electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles, is that like going forward that now forever? Or
Right.
like, because at some point I feel like there's gonna be a tipping point where more people are buying electric vehicles than gas vehicles. And so
Now we
that-
don't have a fee.
Right, right, so I mean, I
We've
think,
lost the
what I was
stream of
thinking, I
revenue,
think there
folks.
might, we
What do we-
might,
Well,
What is the revenue for the stickers
It's
total?
about 130,000 a year.
About 130,000 a year. I mean, it's gonna take a while before that happens,
of course.
right? And if we can encourage it and speed that process up, then great. I wouldn't wanna eliminate the revenue, but at the same time, I would love to encourage people driving more electric vehicles.
But
why don't we put a 5-year sunset provision on it, and then whoever's here 5 years from now can decide whether to renew it. And I don't mean that in a kick the can down the road kind of point of view, but I mean it from the
Oh, it'll be
point
another
of view of
assessment
it
point.
will
But that would be
automatically
an appro-
sunset if
I'm fine with
appropriate.
that. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So 5-year sunset.
And then have we defined what type of electric vehicle?
We'll come up with, there's some other, I'm looking at a governmental, or US governmental, there's another types of EV classifications. We'll look at the current list of what we have in town and see kind of what we're looking at and with the current list of vehicles and that we have with our vehicle license programs.
So my original question is, between having this done on a timely basis and approving this, we've got enough time
We
to
got
pull
a
all this
month.
together?
I think we have 30 days. I think we can do that. Yeah.
Okay.
I was more worried about the ability, we're right on the verge of pushing out communications to residents about it's time to sign up, and we wanted to say, this is what it is. So that may be more difficult. If we can early on, if you trust us to get the right classifications right, then that, you know, but that's what it is, because it's gonna have to be figured out really fast.
Yeah.
And then actually getting the ordinances to approve it after the fact, if you wanna do it this year.
Right.
So could we, I'm sorry, I'm just thought something. Could we do a free vehicle sticker for a pure electric vehicle and a half discounted for a plug-in or something like that? I mean, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be a discount for one classification and a fully free for electric as well.
You could do that.
How much time is there a time issue with that from staff? I mean,
When do the letters go out? Or when is the, you're
from
the-
the standpoint of managing all that, is it
Sure.
going to take a
So
lot of time?
we're actually in the middle of implementing a new website, online base for vehicle sticker sales that will allow for online sales. So today I actually spoke with, and my staff did with the gentleman who's working on that website with us. So how fast we could turn around identifying electric vehicles on the current data would be my question. I don't know. And associating a fee with them. I have to check and see what's driving the fee on the website. Is it the passenger vehicle versus truck versus senior, or is it actually the make? I'd have to look at, you know, how that would work.
So-
I can't answer it that quickly.
So creating a more complex structure, I mean, now it's,
No, this is it.
vehicles are this, now it's going to be electric vehicles are one and regular vehicles are another, and we were considering electric, hybrid, with a plug-in component and regular. And the question was, do you feel like, you know, we've obviously made it more complicated adding the whole electric vehicle option. Do you feel like it's getting exponentially more complicated? We don't want to, you know, we could take baby steps and just say, we're gonna carve out electric only at this point and see if that flies. If we feel like the implementation was easy, then we could tick toward,
You know, my initial concern was how would we as staff identify hybrids?
I would think it would be self-identified by the resident.
The tough part is, like Drew was saying, if there are a couple of different phases, what we would normally know is a Chevy Volt, we would have that information. But
Right.
if there are multiple categories of
Right.
volts,
Right.
then it might be difficult for them to discern whether it's all electric or a
Right.
plug-in hybrid.
But that's why I'm saying, I think we ought to put it on the resident to self-identify. I mean, could they do it incorrectly?
Yeah.
I suppose that's possible, but the alternative is what? We're getting somebody who's ticking a box and getting a half price instead of a full price, or, you know, the whole idea is that we don't want to increase staff oversight and
I get it,
maintenance,
You
but,
don't want me, I'm your next door neighbor, and guess what I did?
okay. So you're saying that's not a good idea?
Well, I'm just saying it gets complicated, which is, I think, back to what somebody else had pointed out. And I was enthusiastic about this, and now I'm kind of feeling like,
Right.
you know,
Well, how about
I
if-
don't want to make this a full-time job for staff,
I completely agree.
so.
I completely agree, and so maybe with the direction that this is a very short time frame, if soon into this process you feel like it's spinning like out of control, then the answer is not this year. We can look at it the next year.
we can always bring it to you.
Yeah,
And
let us know.
after this year's
Yeah.
process, come back and bring it and say, hey, we've looked at the data, here's the actual best
Yeah.
information. There's 70 of these types of vehicles, there's this, and if you wanted to design a program around that, we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like that.
I'm fine with that. And, you know, doesn't the state of Illinois identify these for in the plates anyway, for the most part?
Yes.
There's electric plates?
Yeah,
Well, that's your entry point.
yeah. Well, and
That's your
I was
data
gonna,
entry point.
we're gonna come up with some categories. If you
Right.
wanted to step on the gas, no pun intended, we could find a way to make it
Step
work.
on
And
the
there are probably
electric.
pretty practical ways to do it.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Very
But-
good.
Okay.
All right.
And
So we'll-
it could be as simple as the plate, then.
That'd be the easiest
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that would only be for pure electrics. It wouldn't,
gonna
it
say, I don't
wouldn't,
think the
it wouldn't, they don't get it for hybrids or plugins.
Yeah, at
Well,
least
then
not
maybe that's
now.
the start,
So that's a start.
right there.
That's a good start.
That's a start. And so,
Would we support that? Would we support the 100% electric, you driving it off the
I would support that.
I would,
Yes.
plate?
Yes.
Yes?
yes.
You'll have that data?
I think that's doable. Well, we
Okay.
we
And
have the
indeed doing
plates,
it
so-
now then, if we can.
Right, enter in your plate, Is that one of the things we ask? It'll
Yes,
be there.
absolutely.
So we'll have that
Right. And we're
without
also
adjusting,
getting
even
DMV
without even
data.
adjusting the database with the website?
No, I mean, we could,
Because you're in your plate?
Comes in with a personalized plate.
I'd have to check with him, but I feel like that's doable.
Okay.
Here's my card,
Okay.
and here's my
Yeah.
registration.
My plate is El Chapo. It's a electric. Starts with the L. Isn't that what it is?
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, good Lord.
So this,
The Model T.
so this particular bunny trail of the conversation came from things that were not,
Things that fell to the cutting room floor.
fell on the cutting room floor that just got picked up off the floor,
Picked up
dusted
and
off.
reconstituted.
Right. So were there other items that you wanted to talk about? Because we do have a couple, we had a couple other,
And 19 minutes.
okay. So let's, so staff has direction. We can safely move on to the review of the water fund? Bettina?
Sure.
So just to be clear, we're doing the electric plate but designation through Illinois' the Secretary of State's office
Registration,
today. And then also, we're going to do the building department fee waiver for any electrical work
Installation.
associated with putting in hardware for electrical vehicle support.
Yes, please.
Yep,
Yes.
you got it. Okay.
Thank you.
So included in your packet was an update on the water fund budget to show revenues and expenditures as budgeted for the coming biannual budget. Last Finance Committee meeting, we did discuss the rate and the effects to the net assets and determined that the rate would remain flat until we've received all of our water meter non-revenue data through the water meter installation project. So just a quick snapshot at the expenditures. There were a few questions that Trustee Ankerman presented with regards to water sales and purchases. So while historically this year our water purchases are trending down, I still used the $650,000 estimated budget number for the expenditures in the water purchase line, just because it's been conservative, although it is downtrending. So we'll keep our eye on that, and if that needs to be adjusted, we'll certainly do that going forward in the second year of the biennial budget. Other than that, there's not a lot that was really new in the water fund itself. Does anyone have any questions with regards to what was presented in the categories for capital, debt, and personnel and contract services?
Well, then in terms of revenue, we held the water rate flat until we see what happens with all the new meters.
Right.
Right.
The only additional question that you also had that I could reiterate was the question with regard to capital outlay and the expenditures in the budget. So for projected year end, we had the $950,000 number that was tied to the meter project. That number is likely to change as the project expenses are not exactly what we anticipated for the current year, and most of them, or some of them, will also come out of next year. So we may see more of a $650,000 number at year end, and then the additional expenses will be incurred next year, so you see a budget change to that. And those rolling expenditures kind of change the numbers to the budget and the capital expenses. And then in the out years, the $400,000 number in '22 is actually part of the capital 10-year plan that we looked at, that engineer Hansen talked about trying to maintain a 10% number there to maintain sewer line, or not sewer lines, but water main repairs and valve repair replacements in the out years, so that we continue with a percentage of replacements through the capital plan.
So it's kind of looking at the water system in the same manner that we do with our roads, where we want to do a
Exactly.
certain amount of, it's
Right.
time that we don't wait for something to break before we say it's aging, it's less likely to have a long life. Let's look at that.
Right, so the sum of all those budget numbers exceed the bond money that was received, but in part because not all of it's being spent in the same budget years that they were originally allocated. So,
Thank you for addressing all of the questions that I
Sure.
had talked
problem.
about earlier. Are there any other comments or items to discuss regarding the water budget? And so you're looking at the budget, you're probably looking for just direction that, this is, we're liking what we see and that we should move forward with these numbers.
mhm.
So do we have direction from the board in that regard?
You have it. Move forward.
Yes.
Please.
And we know what we need to do with the comprehensive fee schedules, unless there's any more comments about the memorandum.
Well, yeah, I didn't know if that was something that anybody wanted to address either. I hadn't gotten to that yet.
Is this the 25% off on the green buildings?
Yes.
I'm not as crazy about that if that's gonna be 25% off a $10 million project that gets $336,000. So maybe a diminishing schedule.
Well, 25% off of 3%.
Yeah, no, still, that's, what is that, what's my math here? That's still $70,000
It's
and
and
change.
projects of that scale are low volume with us, right? And if you looked
Yeah.
at our building permit fee timeline, the revenue stream, you know, there's been a couple bumps in our history, but it's usually been, it's a low number, right? It's never been super productive for the village in terms of revenue stream, other than when the Target outlot got redeveloped.
Right.
That was the biggest bump we've ever seen, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
We could certainly start with the residential projects. I mean, that's a much smaller potential impact on the village, but could certainly be a much more impact on a homeowner thinking about doing either a passive house or a LEED certified project.
yeah,
So if you
I'd
look
be in
at
favor
that-
of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the project that was listed, 2017, a single-family residence at the value of the improvement, $650,000. The permit fees, $38K, so that would have been, to an individual homeowner, $10,000 almost. Is
Yeah,
that,
and that'll get real incentives, though. I mean, if you,
yeah,
on real people, $70,000 isn't gonna change the behavior of Target, and I don't know that we care about changing the behavior of Target, but $10,000 on an individual will change behavior.
well, for those of you who were around the table when Target sales tax sharing agreement and the development agreement approvals were being discussed, the village talked about incentivizing them to do this or finding some other way to get them to pursue LEED certification, and they didn't want to do it. They said, we don't want to be held to it, but we will pursue it. And then we didn't know that actually until after the fact.
That they did it,
They
yeah.
actually did it.
they got LEED certified.
They said, they were telling us the whole way that, no, we don't want to spend the money on the paperwork, and then they never even came back. We only found out just doing some research that they actually did it.
Wow.
I mean, I think a large corporation is gonna do it or they're not. Any permit fees are really not gonna have an impact on their decision to do
It's
it.
going to be a corporate
It's gonna be,
decision.
it's gonna be a corporate culture.
Right.
So, but I think a single-family residential could be,
That could be
Could be-
significant, and I
that could be-
Agree.
think that I think would be very telling for us to do.
I just had one question at the very end when they talked about Northbrook, having this incentive program in place, and then there's a comment in there about the Northbrook staff saying that they didn't feel like it was effective. Could someone just speak to that, like what that comment means?
Glenn did this
read-
research.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about this because I've researched it myself, but their ordinance was specifically for LEED certification and not for passive house. And passive house is, I would say, more attainable for a residential project than LEED certification.
LEED's
that-
not really set up for
Does
residential.
that sound good?
It's commercial.
I don't know about more attainable, but certainly more attractive.
Attractive.
I would definitely say that. So LEED certification looks at a number of different dimensions, for example, energy efficiency, stormwater management, the sourcing of materials, if there's a LEED certified professional on the job, so on. It's very holistic. By comparison, the upside of passive house is that it's really very narrowly focused on directly the efficiency of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, that air envelope, and then indirectly, an increasing part of the certification is just overall energy efficiency. So now you have a continuum that goes from, the basic requirements of the code, the International Energy Conservation Code, mandatory in Illinois, through Energy Star, through Energy Star Zero Ready, and now we're getting up into passive house. And so that's very direct, it's one-dimensional, and every buck you put in is a buck a homeowner saves over X amount of time.
And how does that tie into this comment that the staff at Northbrook said?
Sure, so we didn't have an extensive conversation. The counterpart I was working with in Northbrook was out of town, so we were communicating by email. Certainly their program does not involve an incentive for passive house. We didn't look high and low for one. I'm not familiar with one in Chicagoland that's specific to passive house.
Okay.
I think their mechanism was focused mostly on LEED, which again has some at the residential level, you don't see too many LEED certified houses. It's really a commercial is where the volume is. And then, you know, there's always questions of how many projects were there, how effective was the incentive, how well was it advertised. I mean, if you're a major corporation, to quote Trustee Meyer, you've probably made the decision on whether or not you'll pursue that certification before you've, you know, may have a specific site or know about a specific incentive. So there's a few different parts of this. I'm speculating a bit, but they're indicating that they'll move towards a structure that really looks at percentages for individual features, which has a certain amount of attraction, but also these are, for them and especially for us, these are very small dollar amounts, very small volumes. And so I don't know how much you can distinguish between shades of gray if we start talking about 3%, 5%, 10%.
What kind of LEED, you mentioned LEED has a significant overhead with respect to the paperwork and everything else along with the increased cost of materials and things like that. What's the comparables for a certified passive house in terms of, if I'm a homeowner, what is that going to cost me out of pocket? I mean, there are a lot of passive things that I can do that don't generate a certified house as opposed to doing the certified house. I mean, do you have an idea of what?
Certainly. So I've heard numbers between 3 and 7% that aim to be relatively conservative. There are higher numbers out there. I know the architect that worked on that Woodland house said that the payback, he wasn't specific as to percentage in my recollection, but he said the payback was pretty aggressive within that 10-year span. I mean, again, part of the incentive, I guess I would respond to the point I think you're making in two ways. One, part of the incentive to be certified then would be to gain access to the incentive, which means we know that you built a house to that standard, subsequent purchasers are assured of that, we can advertise it. And two, a lot of these techniques are pretty, you know, the people that want to do them to these high standards, you know, part of the passive house certification is independent verification of the design. You know that someone's not selling.
I guess where I'm getting is that we're probably not going to help them recover the cost of doing that, which is kind of the difference between a commercial project and a residential project. It's a much more personal thing with my own home. Plus, I'm guessing the additional expense for contractors and materials, design, and those kinds of things are really going to run the cost of that up.
Well, if it's a 10%, let's say, off the $650,000, then as a homeowner, I'd be paying an additional $60,000 to, or it would have been something like $580,000, but I was willing to pay $650,000. But then my fees would be reduced by $10,000. So it's not going to, that in itself isn't going to offset it, but it is going to help. And then you've got that lifespan of 7 or 10 years over which somehow that will partially be recouped. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say also, if you were interested, maybe something we can arrange with you and our sustainability group, another approach. But you know, the architect who worked on that Woodland house is definitely a big advocate of the certification. He led a Chicagoland tour here in town.
Now, the other direction is, you know, there are probably some very discrete things that one could do, and whether or not we should acknowledge that. Aaron mentioned before something about solar and those kinds of things, with discrete project that has very clear return. Putting on a secondary roof, discrete project, has a very specific return. There are a number of different kinds of things like that. It's a question of whether we incentivize those kinds of projects, or we go and say we will incentivize a certified passive home, which covers all that, but you know, maybe I don't want to process all the paperwork, kind of like.
Why would it have to be either or? Why can't we do both of those?
Maybe that's what I'm saying is,
I would be in favor of doing both, yeah.
Is how do we manage that, because both of those are environmentally sensitive and certainly send a sustainability message from us.
So
And-
in terms of the memorandum that we have before us of the comprehensive fee ordinance and the green building initiatives, one of the adopted changes could be trying to incentivize some of these fees, and I don't know if we have at this point enough time to consider.
Yeah, if
You
that,
know-
if that passive house issue in the lead is not ripe enough, we can go back and get some more research and bring it back to the committee.
Exactly.
Happy to do that.
Okay.
And to Mark's point, I think we should also discuss what certain improvements, individual improvements, maybe not
Yeah.
whole building projects, we could also incentivize.
Agree.
All right. So I
Which
think we
sounds
have,
like is what Northbrook is going towards, is that right?
Yes, I think with particularly a stormwater focus in their community.
Thank you.
so I don't know if in our lengthy discussions with all the bunny trails, if we actually addressed some of the informational items and the items that you might have presented in a staff report, but Drew, is there anything else that we should have covered in this?
I guess just to clarify, the one thing that's, I would go back to what's on the cutting room floor that's still not here, and I think maybe it's because the project's still not ripe yet, but it could be added in, certainly at the biennial check-in, is the senior project that this body has talked about with Lake Forest. That's not in here, but they've said, stand by, and so it's
That's an expensive standby.
$75K. So,
And we're still waiting on
them to come back to
their
us and say,
guarantees, right?
well, I think the project was taking shape. They didn't know how many units they were going to have. There
Right,
was a lot of
right.
unknowns they were dealing with.
Right.
And Mark, you're probably closest to that than anybody.
There were 4 or 5 units and $75K, but there were a lot of loose ends.
Yeah.
I've been away from it now for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
So,
But I haven't had any new updates. But that's something that you may see
Right.
in 12 months from now.
Right. Well,
Okay.
I was personally very interested in hearing how we could participate, what it actually looks like when it has more shape and
Yeah.
form and dollars with it. But I'm very interested personally to hear about that. Okay,
We'll bring it forward when we see it.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, I think we've reached the end. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.